You know, sometimes I feel like people try too hard to be nonchalant or normal. The problem is that we just don't want to be called weird anymore or different because that's exactly what we're taught not to be. We're taught to be obedient, and no matter what we say, that's usually what we turn out to be. Because as humans, we are not what we'll say we'll do, we are what we actually do. And we reap what we sow. And what we sow is our actions and not our intentions. Um, so you might be wondering, how does this tie into being normal? Well, it ties in because obedience shuts down difference. And obedience trains us to move together, like a herd of sheep drifting toward the same place at the same time and thinking the same thoughts. But every once in a while, there's an odd one out, and that odd one out is the one who didn't mistake the thought of being normal or the shadow of being normal for what being normal actually is. Because being normal has never meant being identical, and it should never mean being identical. It should mean being unique. The rest of the herd in this situation mistakes normality for a blurry average, just projected onto a wall and then being treated as if it were real. So we, or the sheep in this case, strain ourselves just trying to match that average. And we sand down our edges, we quiet the strange parts of ourselves that we might get called weird or different for. So we just become a shape. We try to resemble a shape that has never truly existed. And that's not a good thing because in our republic, harmony is not being the same as one another. It's it is what difference is held in right relation. A society collapses when everyone in it tries to be the same kind of person. In the same way, a soul would collapse when every part demands the same role. Because each of us were meant to do different things. And uniformity, feels safe because it asks less of us. It tells us to copy each other instead of create ourselves. And uh, a society that is built on repetition is identicalness. And to be identical is to be interchangeable. And to be interchangeable is to avoid the risk of being seen. But creation has never worked that way and never will work that way because nothing in nature has ever repeated perfectly, one to one. Like, even copies of the same plant will always be different. They'll, they won't have the same structure, they won't look the same. And if there were a single correct way to be human, we nature wouldn't just bother with excess variation because the the thing is that difference isn't an error in the process of creation. It is what the process actually is. It, we are supposed to be unique, like the plants and the animals. So, calling someone normal, then, is not praise. It is more, it's the most polite way to say unthreatening. To call someone unthreatening because they are normal. And that is why it's an insult. to me personally, because normality should not be normalized. It should not be remarkable to be called normal. It should be expected to be called different, because that's what we really are. We are all different. If we look at someone like Plato, if we look at his philosophy, he was it was never a template meant to make us clones of one another. His forms were just ideals, which were approached from tons of different angles. And justice this like justice doesn't look the same in every person. Wisdom won't ever speak with a singular voice, and goodness won't like be the same. It won't ever be one single thing in everyone. It's always going to be different. So maybe the task is to it might not be to become normal at all. Maybe it is to become precise, and the way to do that would be to inhabit the shape that was what you were already leaning toward before you learned to apologize for it, before you were laughed at or called weird because you weren't like everyone else. And difference shouldn't be called rebellion. It shouldn't be considered rebellion anytime soon. Because calling it rebellion is calling it what it isn't. Because difference is alignment, like I just said. It's aligning with the particular shape you were leaning toward before you were taught to not lean towards that shape. And pretending it is rebellion is just confusing the shadow with its source, like the sheep in the first mention. The soul was never born as just this blank piece of paper to be made to be stamped with the same seal over and over again. It was born as a living thing, which was already bent in a certain direction. So education then, it won't be the act of forcing it into a common mold, but of turning it gently towards what it was fitted to see. And calling someone normal wouldn't be illuminating them. It only dims them more. And it starts to ask an eye that was made for distance to pretend it was made only for the ground beneath their feet. And maybe that's why difference is treated with like suspicion now. Not because it's dangerous to us, but because it refuses to be predictable like the next person is. And a person who can't be averaged can't be easily directed, because they won't be moving on cue, you know? They won't copy what someone else does or what they look like. They'll hesitate where some copiers will obey, and they'll start to question what people will repeat and say over and over again, because that alone is enough to make them uncomfortable to stand near. So normality then becomes kind of a social contract. Agree to be legible, and you'll be left alone. But if you agree to be quiet, you'll just be called mature. But this piece is shallow, and it is a piece of things that just don't grow. Because what calls itself stability is often just like another stagnation with better branding. Um, Plato kind of warned that a soul out of alignment becomes unjust, even if it appears orderly. And the same can be true of a society. When difference is disciplined and laughed at, it only turns into resentment and imitation, and it lives like it feels like a half lost memory. So when people chase normal, they're most likely not choosing balance. They're not trying to find that balance in life. Not like they're choosing invisibility. They're choosing not to risk becoming clear. And clarity is dangerous, but not because it harms others, because it removes excuses for stuff we do and stuff we think and why we do it. And, like, don't get me wrong, a life lived in imitation can still function, but it just can't be honest. And maybe that is the quiet cost of all this sameness. Not rebellion, not chaos, but the slow erosion of truth. Because people forget what they are inclined toward. They forget what once felt natural. And they start confusing comfort with goodness and approval with virtue. The tragedy, though, isn't that difference exists, like I said earlier. The tragedy is that so many people spend their lives forgetting it and unlearning it and not caring about what difference is and how to be different.